it's good to do smart PR and know what you're getting into. And they could have announced ahead of time. Oh, by the way, if the sea state gets too high, this thing may fall apart. But they didn't do that. So, yeah, embarrassing. And many people have said sort of typical of what when you rush into something and announce you're going to do it during a speech rather than talk it over ahead of time with people. And as you say, no fault to the army. They did everything they could with their slow boats to Gaza, and they, setting the thing up. And some cargo did pass through there, which was immediately seized by Hamas and used for their own purposes.
Yeah, as much as I love a good inter-service rivalry, I continue to use this analogy because I think it's one that folks, if they don't come from the military arena, but they are paying attention to this because it is a high-profile issue, is the charge of the Light Brigade. You can't blame the individual troopers on that. They just look to their leaders and they say, "Off we go," and they went. Did what they were supposed to do. You have to, go up the chain to look for failures. But yeah, there are certain fundamentals on these things that's always been true. I've seen it written, and Paul mentioned it in the chat room. JLOTS was designed for use. It was used in Haiti, which we actually did a mid-rats about a decade ago. The Haiti operation. It was designed to use in existing ports or something that had a breakwater. Most of the listeners here have either been underway or flown over the Mediterranean. It's not a small body of water, but even if you're from the Great Lakes, you have an appreciation that when you have that long of a reach, waves will build up with even a large thunderstorm rather quickly. And I believe we discussed it a little bit on a mid-rats after this was announced, that pray for good weather because it's not something that is ready to be out there in front of what Mother Nature has to throw at her, and that's what happened. What I really hope that happens, and we have enough people in Congress that know it, is part of their oversight function. They have to find some way to get hold of the decision brief for this, because I think uh, there is a very important story here about how commander's intent, higher direction, and guidance coming from the pole mill level responses results in different courses of action, and somebody selects that course of action and the assumptions that came with it, the critical capabilities, vulnerabilities analysis that went into that decision, and who did what. Not unlike what happened in Kabul, the classification levels are such in Kabul that I don't know when that's going to happen, maybe in 20 years. But this is your standard issue humanitarian assistance disaster response operation. There's not a lot classified here. So if Congress has to do it behind closed door, that's fine. But there's something very instructive here. I do not know, and John Conrad and Sal Marcagliano, I haven't seen anybody nationally or internationally who's covered this better than those two individuals. From them on down and sideways, when this was announced, I do not know anybody who has even done one deployment who looked at that and went, "That's sustainable," regardless of what happened with the gear. Once it got the gear, the supplies, once it got on the trucks and disappeared into Gaza, that's a different topic for somebody at the State Department to deal with. But from a military point of view, uh, it was not good.
Yeah, and I think that there's a CB version, the the elevated causeway system or LCAS, which actually they drive uh, piles in place, and it's a little more robust than this. But in my understanding of it is that I don't know when the last time that was used, but they do practice with it. I know they did in 2016, play with it, and I think it's out. I don't know, maybe it's in storage somewhere. Maybe they thought this was going to be a more rapid uh, way to get this pier in there. They wanted to move quickly to make sure that the voters in Michigan or wherever they're trying to impress with this would acknowledge that the aid was not being diverted through Israel, which, as Sal McCargilano was pointed out, they're perfectly good ports in Israel that can and could uh, be used to access the beach and get the goods that are being sent to Gaza uh, down to where the intention was to have it go.
Yeah, I think the restraints and the constraints about this would be interesting to see. And this is all written, it's all in paperwork. It better be at least. That's the way it's supposed to be done. But I could see very well where they had a couple of um, things they had to work around. One, no boots on the ground, and what the Seabees could have constructed, you're going to have to get boots on the ground. Now, the beach there was under the control of Israel, and bringing things through the port of Israel. This has State Department written all over it, where we don't want to be seen as part working with the Israeli military, so we want to be separate from it. Blah blah blah. I can see that argument being made, and unfortunately winning the day. The ironic thing is, what I've been able to gather, maybe you've seen more details, is they've collected the various floaty bits from the pier and are moving it over to uh, the port. I think it's Ascalon, or the one up coast from it, to be repaired and fixed up. So whether we wanted to or not, we're working pretty closely with the Israeli ports just to get that. I don't know if they're going to repair it to try to reinstall it, or they're just repairing it so they can take it back home. That'll be interesting to watch. But uh, I think we would double our pain if we got it repaired, brought it over there, installed it, and the next storm blew it around again.
Yeah,
Um,
this is a really good lesson to be learned about preparation for war and using equipment. There's a nice article in the current issue, the June issue of Proceedings by a guy named Ron Weinberger, talking about he's talking about tabletop exercises for wartime acquisition. Because I'm going to quote from this a little bit. It says. Too often, peacetime exercise planners do not completely anticipate the urgency and geographic constraints of wartime scenarios. U.S. naval commands have not encountered an actual contested logistics environment since the 1940s. Because tabletop exercise planners and participants lack firsthand knowledge in such an environment, their decision making is based on what they experience in their day to day jobs. They assume there will be ready means to expedite contracts for additional supply support. This assumption rests on the belief the Department of Defense could continue to maintain a mostly uninterrupted supply line as it does during peacetime. And as he points out, that's a matter of great concern because uh, that's not necessarily true that's going to work that way. So it's a timely reminder that we don't train the way we're going to fight, and we can. It's too easy to assume. I had a Marine gunnery sergeant explain to me about that. It's too easy to assume that things are going to go the way you want them to, uh, because they've always gone the way you wanted to them since you, in your experience, which, as he said, is not. We've never been challenged on this since the 1940s.
yeah, it's not on the scale of military operations. This is not at one of the more complex levels, but we have failed here too. It's it's disheartening to see what something like this can not just do to our reputation. A lot of being a superpower, hyperpower, however you want to describe what we are at present. It has to do with reputation and people's assumptions of your competence. And we haven't been doing a really great job of that. I think that's one of the secondary impacts of this that may not be very well appreciated, especially by the People's Republic of China, who have their own issues that we'll talk about later on, I think. But the another thing that kept to the top of my mind while watching this is, God bless the U.S. Marines. They've done most of the, at least, world-facing public discussions about what they would like to do in the Pacific to make it more challenging for an expansive China. Uh, that involves a lot of islands, a lot of unimproved airfields. And as the Russians have taught everybody, if your airfield and your seaport is within range of somebody's rockets, you might not have use of it for very long. So this JLOT's capability, and the capability CBs already have, it does beg the question: how many of these do we have, and where are they useful? And I think the answer is kind of scary because there's we don't have that many, and you've got to do a beach survey or a harbor survey to know where they might be useful. But we all saw how long it took our one JLOTs to get to the Eastern Med. Leaving the East Coast and getting somewhere near Tinian Island. Oh, that would take a while. Hopefully, the Pacific will be nice and peaceful, as the name goes. But that's not a very good assumption. So, how will this inform? I'm not sure. I think there's some other options involving some ships that we haven't bought that might be a better solution than what we saw.
Well, and then I see the Army is talking about getting rid of its pre-positioning stuff, ships, and you know, you got to go. All the lessons you could learn from the things that are going on in the world. Why would you do that?
Especially the capability that pre-positioning stocks use. You can have pre-positioning ships in Europe, or you can have them in the Western Pacific, but we haven't been very good at knowing when the next medium to larger war is going to break out. So yeah, I've heard people say, well, we don't need them in Europe, or we don't need them here. That's okay. They can get underway and go to West Africa. They can go to Madagascar. They can find their way to Uruguay. Pick some place nobody thinks is going to be a problem that might be a problem at some point that we need to get some stuff located. Especially if we rightfully reposition our global posture, that we take advantage of our natural comparative advantage, which is at a maritime and aerospace power, and our ground power is kept at a lower state of readiness and at home. And if we need to go someplace, we can go there and meet the equipment. It's much better to have that situation than to put another 30, 40,000 people on Okinawa or something. To do that, it begs the question, okay, where are the stocks? How long are they going to have to get in theater? And the maritime prepositioning ships have always been a nice solution to that problem. Yes, they're vulnerable. Yes, the equipment sits there for a while, but they had a good exercise back when I was a little kid uh, as a junior officer during Desert Storm. We've used them on other occasions too, but they're a fraction of what they were even 30 years ago. So totally get rid of them. How are they going to meet that capability? I haven't seen that explanation outlined anywhere.
Yeah, I know that the Congress has actually jumped all over this and wants the Army to explain how they plan to do this stuff, particularly those Congress people who are familiar with how difficult it is to move things across the Pacific in a hurry. So, yeah, well, I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about it, but it is kind of one of those things that what were they thinking? Approach.
And this sounds cynical, but it's not. It's just informed by experience. There's also counterindicator analysis. For instance, and we talked about it more than once over the last decade and a half. One area the Army, both institutionally and with its funding and planning, has starved to death is air defense for a very, very, very long time. That's why after Soleimani, when the Iranians threw a bunch of their ballistic missiles at that base we had in northern Iraq, there were problems because we didn't have enough air defense. High density, low density, high demand asset. That was an intention. So when you look at what the Army is trying to divest itself of and get rid of, should leave people to go, well, hold on for a second. Let's talk about this. And again, it's one of those things that I don't know what games are being played inside, but a lot of it has to do with sponsorship, advocacy, and the people who are making decision, how much control and influence they have over the existing bureaucracy, or the other way around, that may not have an informed view of what resources are needed where. I fully understand that you can't have everything. We have limited budgets. I also understand the uh, problem with salami slicing to save money, but divesting yourself of entire capabilities. I used the U.S. Navy before 2003 in our riverine forces, and we're going back to it. The minute you leave that gaping capability gap, you need to ask yourself, well, uh, what are we as a nation going to be tasked to do? And if anybody jumps up and tells anybody, I know exactly what we're going to do and exactly what's going to meet that need, that person probably shouldn't be invited to the next meeting, because they're either delusional or they're lying to you. We just, nobody can see the future. That's why you need flexibility, multi-mission capability. Why has the C-130 been used for so many different things over the course of, how old is that bird? 60 some odd years old, the design? It's been improved. It's because it's relatively affordable, relatively flexible, and has a functional and scalable cargo area you can plug stuff into, as opposed to something that's very, very bespoke and meets a specific narrow requirement. It usually don't work out real well.
Yeah, and it also points out. I think back in April, Mackenzie Eglin had an article called "You Go to War with the Industrial Base You Have."
Yep.
It's time to revisit that again, and you know, it's why so many people are pushing us as a nation to gear up again, to get ready to if we have to, not that we want to, but if we have to go to war with whoever. So it's good to see people who are in the know or have occupied and will occupy again important positions in the government raising these issues.
You know, speaking of predicting the future, it's one of the little snarky comments I brought up right before the show, tease folks to listen to, was a little phrase that I was trying to get my idea around how I could explain this. I call it wish casting Tomorrowland. One thing that's been a great frustration for me and you and really everybody has been what has been divulged is happening to the Constellation class frigate over the course of the last few weeks, where it's the timeline has shifted hard to the right for I've heard 3 years, 18 months. We'll call it between 18 months to 3 years, depending upon what you read and what you remember. But people, I think, have forgot the reason why we even have a Constellation class frigate is it's a response to the utter and complete failure of the LCS program, and to find something that we could build that was a proven design that would minimize program and design risk. And so they had a competition. The Italians and the French have been building FREM for quite a while in more than one variation. And the original concept, uh, in my world, we would have had higher than 85%, 80%, 85% commonality, because it always, I always saw it as a gap filler. It's like we need to get these boats in the water, acknowledge the fact they're not what we would do if we designed it, but you know what, we haven't. So build what we have, accept some of the design limitations, at least in flight one, but get holes in the water. And the same, we decided to bring in a new ship, but we didn't bring in a new bureaucracy. So the same people that gave us LCS, Zumwalt, CGX, also got their hands around the Constellation class frigate. And it is producing the results one would expect. And an individual I have great confidence in, gave me a little hint at one of the conversations he had with the folks up in DC who were involved in the however many miles it is from DC to where they're building the Constellation frigate up in Fincantieri Yards on the Great Lakes, I think. Um, However many miles screwdriver that is, was, quote, the design is not ready for tomorrow's fight, unquote. We heard that when they decided they were going to decommission the sprue cans early over a quarter century ago. That argument still has purchase. It's very disheartening to see what they've done to what should have been a fairly straightforward operation to put a general purpose frigate in the water with an American as opposed to an Italian or French flag on it.
Yeah, what I think the description was that the I'm trying to remember exactly how it was phrased, that they're trying to design this thing on the fly, so there is no set plan. And here's a GA quote for you: the Navy's decision to approve the construction with incomplete elements of the ship's design, including information gaps related to structural, piping, ventilation, and other systems, and the underestimation of adapting a foreign design to meet Navy requirements have driven this weight growth. Resolving this weight growth adds another dimension to shipbuilders' ongoing design activities, further diminishing the predictability of these already schedule challenged efforts. You know, I think you've talked about the 20s when we would build a cruiser, then we would play with it for a while, then we would make changes in the next iteration of that same class. And we just that's if you have the luxury of time. We don't have the luxury of time. We've either go with what the design was, and if you don't like it when you get it, then you can modify it later on. But we need ships now, not the ships 5 years from now that maybe will be better than what is currently available. It drives me nuts.
And anybody in this situation with the Constellation, um, senior leadership, whether civilian or uniformed, when they had somebody on the table throw out the wish casting Tomorrowland, like they knew exactly what the fight tomorrow was, and their vision was worth risking an entire program that is trying to meet a different requirement than that. They should have been invited to leave and not brought back, because that is exactly the bureaucratic goo that's being put on the floor that has stopped us from competently building a ship since we restarted the Arleigh Burke line. And we had to restart it because everybody bought off on those that thought that they could wish cast Tomorrowland into being. And here we are at in 2024, and we'll just all we have are Burks, and Burks are doing great, but that's not the way it's supposed to work. It would be as if we were
Well,
still building Ford stack destroyers that we started building in 2017 and went to World War II in. It's not the way that
yeah.
works.
Well, even the Chinese, the first ships the Chinese have built are now what 20 years old, 15 years old. I
Yep.
mean, they're not tomorrow's fleet either, but they're not. We're not having to fight tomorrow's fleet today. We're having to fight a fleet that already exists, and all you need are ships that are capable of dealing with them. And to otherwise, you're going to build a bunch of the what the original intent of the LCS was. We're going to have all these empty spaces we will fill with the weapons of tomorrow. Well, that's great, but unless you're going to build a ship the size of an LPD with a bunch of empty spaces in it, you're really barking up the wrong tree because you cannot predict what we're going to need. So arm with what you got, go with what you got, build as many as you can, and do iterations. I mean the Fletcher, I think I put this down somewhere. The Fletcher class destroyers became the I can't remember the next class, but then the next ones became after that became the Gearing class. Well, those ships, the Gearings, lasted into uh, well the late 70s for the U.S. and then a lot of them got sold to places like Taiwan, and they lasted there for another 10 or 15 years. So and the Fig Sevens, which a lot of people found to be undesirable for a lot of reasons. Yeah, they're not Burt class destroyers, but they were capable escorts that could have been upgraded with the proper weapon systems had they needed to be. I mean, the big drawback with them was that they were single screw, and a lot of people didn't like that. But so it goes.
So it goes, and they work like quite fine. And this is it's not an industry problem. This is a Navy problem, whether uniformed or civilian, and the bureaucracy and the processes we have that build ships. And the whole idea that we needed all these extra spaces and we need two different engine rooms, acknowledged, fine. Again, going back to my original prayer, it's like, okay, great, do that in flight too. Just like with the Fig 7, we had the short version and we had the long version. As the Good Idea Ferry wanted to do some corrections and put some things in there, but the first thing has got to be get the good in the water and then bring in your good ideas for improvements in flight two. Just like the Flight One Arleigh Burks didn't have embarked helos, but we fixed that with other flights. Uh, Trying to, well, we don't have to explain what's happening. Just look at the Constellation class frigate program today. That's what happens when you have a uh, a bureaucracy that feels that the Navy should serve it as opposed to it serving the Navy. But at the end of the day, if the problems with the Constellation frigate, uh, this is the present and the prior CNO's failure. They should have driven this horse a little bit more. You can throw the SecNav on it as well, but these were two folks more than anybody else should have had the surface picture in hand, and they can't even literally can't even build a frigate that somebody else has.
Well, I'm not sure the CNO, other than maybe setting the general policy line, because I never, the CNO is not directly in charge of anything as far as I can tell involving the actual Navy. But somebody in Nav C decided that, yeah, this is fine, but it doesn't meet U.S. Navy standards for, and you can say X, Y, and Z, and so we've got to do this and that and the other, and that's pretty much how you've turned a horse into a camel. I mean, it's just, uh, you know, it's the way it goes.
Or if you're looking at the weight expectations, a horse into a hippopotamus.
I, I saw something the other day about how fast hippopotami are. I don't I don't think you those things are quick. I don't think I ever want to be chased by one. Not that I'm at much risk of that. So,
They're like an NFL linebacker. They're big and heavy, but man, they're fast.
yeah.
Well, I get
Let's talk
you
about some
mentioned
more. Let's talk about some more fun things. Let's talk about how whipped out of shape the Chinese are about the Asian NATO.
I was about to say we need to cheer things up here before we get so worked up. I have absolutely enjoyed. I got a former Midrats guest, and if you don't follow him on X, make sure Zach Oda. He put me on to this little quote here um, about the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore is where this all came out of. Is the Deputy Chief of the Joint Staff Department of China's Central Military Committee, only a communist come up with the title that long. And my Mandarin speakers will laugh at my pronunciation, but Lieutenant General Jing Zhengfeng, maybe. And there's also Admiral Dong Zheng was there. He's their Minister of National Defense. But evidently, the good Lieutenant General Zheng Feng had quite an issue with Asian NATO, and the Zach made a great point about it. So just as this, I'm quoting Zach here, quote, just as PLA is clearly communicating its threats to the world, it's also communicating its insecurities. So with this type of public breathing problems because of Asian NATO, I think that's something we need to run with. Um, Give them second guessing. Yeah, they can have Cambodia, but look all around. We don't have to have an official organization, but just like in Ukraine, you have NAFO. It's not a real organization, but it's kind of fun to play with because it irritates the people you want to irritate. The North Atlantic Fellows Organization, for those that aren't aware. this whole Asian NATO is a great opportunity for a change to maybe get in under the skin of the People's Republic of China's PR apparatus as opposed to them usually getting under ours.
Yeah, I don't think I mean, the Chinese are mad about everything. They're mad that the Philippines has finally staked out a serious claim to stuff in its exclusive economic zone. So they're engaging in this typical thuggery. We're going to prevent you from doing anything in this space that belongs to you, and how dare you're the ones causing all the problems. If you didn't complain about our overreach, we wouldn't have a problem at all. I mean, they are so good at blaming the victim, and their ministry of nonsense, whoever puts out some of this junk they put out, they're astonishing. The global times and all that stuff. It is if you have a good sense of humor, it's pretty funny. But you can see that as long as they repeat these lies and these misstatements, and the more they repeat it, and nobody stands up every single time and says no, it's just not true. It, then they're going to get away with it. It's a salami slice and overwhelm you with nonsense approach to things.
Yeah, but I'm having a thorough enjoyment of it. And the Shangri-La dialogue also, can we just name an aircraft carrier Shangri-La again? It's such a great name for an aircraft carrier. But again, maybe in a perfect world that doesn't exist, we could do that. But that there was a lot of news to come out of the Shangri-La dialogue that I want to chew on. Um, and the timing, I think, is auspicious. It got a higher profile than other Shangri-La dialogues, I think. Admiral Paparo, am I getting that right? There's a real interesting panel discussion that he was on that I want to try to get hold of that has him laughing at one of the questions from a PRC brigadier. That's the right approach. We should be the happy, confident warrior out there, and I'll give him a BZ for his performance on that panel. He looked calm. He looked confident. He responded well, which is what you want in that theater. So if folks haven't taken some time, you can go on YouTube or X or wherever. There's some video clips out there from the Shangri-La dialogue. One that's kind of funny about looking for a man in uniform that was actually put out by the Singapore Defense Department, but that's okay. They good sense of humor. The public affairs folks in charge of the Shangri-La dialogue, they should give a little seminar on how to get the word out. I just noticed it more than I had in previous years.
Yeah, they've done a really good job, and I'm sitting there looking at this Global Times uh, uh, tweet, I guess it is, whatever we're calling it now, an X. Uh, Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun likened the South China Sea to a well-managed city. He questioned actions of a certain countries trespassing into a house in the city and not allowing the owner to react. Isn't this bullying? What kind of freedom of navigation is this? He asked. You know, it's well managed because we run it. But the minute the Filipinos decide that they want to get some of their turf back, as was granted to them in the 2016 award, yes, confirming that China had overreached, the Chinese don't want to hear that. No, and that arbitration award doesn't count.
It's like a squatter all of a sudden claiming what a wonderful house and yard they have and is upset at the person who actually owns the house who's trying to do something with it. It's audacious, um, I think is the word. But that's what they want the world to do. They want the world to listen to their lie, know they're being lied to, but accept the lie as if it's the truth and to go with it. That's what a bully does. That's what Imperial China did to their neighbors hundreds of years ago, and then the centuries before that. So there's a tradition here that I think, and I'm making a huge presumption here, that to the Asian ear is even more direct, I think, that it isn't even to our ears, because especially the Vietnamese, They have, and the Japanese, they have a long history with Chinese in various um, waxing and waning phases over the years.
Yeah, they've got to worry because that is the big dog in the neighborhood, and they worry that the big dog U.S. will not come to their assistance should the Chinese really exercise uh, the force that they could do. I mean, they're looking back at the days of the Japanese uh, East Asia cooperative sphere, whatever it's called. That
East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere.
yeah, that's the one. you know, and we all know how that started out. So uh, they're 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 willing to play as long as they know they've got support from the West and especially from the U.S. And I'm afraid the U.S. has not necessarily been staking out the as firmly that the commitments that we will make to the area and to the countries in the region. But we're making some of the right steps. I think AUKUS is the right step. I think the reaffirmation of the relationship with the Philippines is good. The recent exercise with the Philippines, the effort to help Taiwan arm itself, working with Japan, working with Singapore, all that is good stuff. Uh, so it's not like we've totally abandoned the area, but we really need to have a force capable of responding, and we are short. So we see the aircraft carrier Eisenhower being extended on its deployment again. Uh, because we don't have enough carriers. We don't have the assets we need to do all the things we're trying to do around the world, and that just you begin to see these um, dominoes fall. You have to extend a carrier. It's not the first time we've extended a carrier out in that area, but I'm sure the people under on the Eisenhower and the supporting ships are going, oh man, not again. We can't have steak and lobster every couple of months. But
Yeah, it's not just the carrier, it's obviously her embarked air wing, but they've also extended um, her one cruiser, the Philippine Sea, and two Arleigh Burkes, the Gravelly and the Mason. And I'm sure there's some auxiliary ships that are supporting them that either are just in the rotation. I haven't seen anything about them being extended well, but you got to keep the beans and bullets moving. But again, you said it right. There's just again there's not enough carriers out there. The It's a great discussion, and we've both taken part in it. You're sitting in a panel or a salon or having a cigar with a bunch of folks. We talk about the carrier is obsolete and the big ships are too big and too expensive, and you can have these academic arguments. But at the end of the day, when things actually happen in the real world, where's the carrier? Where's the amphibious the expeditionary strike groups? Where are the aircraft? How do we get them there? How can we not leave? And that's even against in the Red Sea, as a reminder, this isn't even a fourth rate naval power. Is a Yemen's in a civil war, and the Houthis are, for you old Cold Warriors, roughly what used to be North Yemen. And they've managed to impact everything from global trade to U.S. carrier strike groups. It's amazing, but you know we don't have a much until we get to the point that things happen in the world and people go, send the carrier home. It's no big deal. Then maybe the carrier is not that useful of an argument. It goes back to again that Tomorrowland wish casting. Yes to these theories and these possibilities of why carriers are not obsolete in this vignette and that vignette. But when you look at the fact that nobody has perfect visibility of the future, what the carrier does have, which is why every nation that can is building them and trying to build more or to keep the ones they already have, there's nothing else on the planet that substitutes for it. And until there's a way to project national will in an effective way in a global basis than you can with a carrier, all of its vulnerabilities and limitations aside, the capabilities it brings to the table, I just do not see a replacement for it that survives first contact with history.
Yeah, and given that it takes time to work up a carrier air wing to allow it to work effectively with the carrier itself. I mean, that's not a uh, not one of those things where you get a bunch of kids together and say, okay, we're going to put on a play and we'll do it in the barn. It takes months. It takes time to get the air crews ready. It takes time to get the equipment ready. It takes time to get them all to work together smoothly. And it's not a process that is done overnight. It isn't, and that's another reason to, if you have more carriers, you can have more people going through that process and have a readier force if you need it. Now, the other side of this is that the presence of the carrier in the Red Sea area has not done what we'd hoped it would do by itself. It is not stopped the Houthis from attacking ships. It has not. It may have diminished their capacity a little bit, but the Houthis are still doing it. They're still hitting ships with these missiles and stuff. And in the same at the same time, the Somali pirates seem to be acting up again. It is a sign that the Western uh, military, either we are too shy about going in and doing, I hate to put troops in the ground, but sometimes a punitive expedition to take out some of these Houthi things might be just what the doctor ordered. Now, how do you do that? Well, unless you're going to go with the airborne corps and have a way to get them back out once you get them in, I'm not quite sure what you do, which is probably why we haven't done that. But I think other people are looking at the profits being made by the commercial carriers that are going around Africa now, and they're going, well, at whose interest are we acting, and is it working? And that is always a question for military ops: is what we're doing stopping what we came to stop?
Yeah, if you define as your purpose is you don't want to normalize threatening global sea lanes, which is what the Royal Navy used to do, and then we took over that responsibility from them primarily, though other people will help. Um, as I've mentioned on other venues, and here, I mean, we have a few thousand years record of what it takes to get rid of piracy. And they're not stealing goods. Well, they did take a ship, so but this is in, I think, a broad definition of piracy. Uh, you do, like you said, you've got to go to shore. Now, I think it's a poison pill argument that I've had thrown at me more than once, saying, "Well, you're going to have to deploy 100,000 troops, and we're going to have to occupy for 6 years." Like, no, you don't. Uh, I don't think the present leadership would ever propose this, but a punitive expedition where you know where this is operating, you go in there and you, in summary, break things and kill people and say, okay, so you're not going to be firing rockets from this area anymore. We're leaving now. If you keep doing this, we will go to your next location and do the same thing. Would that be effective? Maybe. But what we're doing right now is not effective unless our hope is, because they are an Iranian proxy, that we have a plan to somehow starve them so they have inventory X and eventually they'll run out of it and they can't replace it. Then the problem kind of solves itself, more or less. But I think that assumes a little bit uh, unicausal analysis where they have more than one way to get equipment and capabilities. And for right now, it is quite useful to the Iranians. Maybe the decision has been made that we are comfortable with the existing situation in the Red Sea, that it's not worth doing a punitive expedition or doing anything more than what we already have. If so, we have another situation, kind of like we have in the Balkans, where you're going to have forces permanently stationed there because nobody ever solved the underlying problem because they're content with a slow bubbling threat that requires external military forces to be there. That's not optimal, but at least for now, that seems to be the way that we're heading.
Yeah, and as a Kosovo will never go away. It's just, those people didn't like each other in 1389, and they don't like each other now. So it's uh,
It's
it's a mess.
yeah.
Yeah,
I'd like to. I'd like.
well, go ahead.
No, no, you're fine.
Well, the question is, at what point does the U.S. say, okay, you, Egypt, it's your Suez Canal. You've got to do something. You're the ones losing millions of dollars by not having shipping go through. Uh, you've got to act. All the other countries that are on the Suez Canal that make any money out of it need to do something. The Saudis have been fighting the Houthis for a long time, but as long as we're doing the work, they don't have any real reason to step forward. But it's got to be in their economic and societal interests to take on these rogue organizations, these non-state actors, and do something about it. And if they're afraid to do it because, well, that would be giving aid to the Israelis, and the we it that has usually not been a problem in the long run, where Jordan and Egypt have actually been cooperative in a lot of ways with the Israelis, and we've seen some from the accords that were signed during the Trump administration. We've seen some other Arab states going, we can live with Israel, but there is the regional power, the Iran, who is not happy with any of this stuff. So, that's you hit it on the head. How do we stop Iran from continuing to supply the Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah and the things that they're doing in Syria? So because you know what they want. They want a port in the Med, and they see if they can get that through Lebanon or someplace, they'll be interested in keeping it.
I don't think it's a novel theory of international relations and power politics that you can somehow take this regime and make them be a good faith actor on the national scene, on the international scene. They have no history of wanting to do that. They have no motivation or incentive to do that. Uh, but there are enough people who have bought into this that have levers of power right now that they Iran's in a pretty good spot, really, with this group of folks that aren't interested in countering them, but turning them. But I don't think the Iranian government is interested in being turned.
No,
I
and
th-
they've got what's the old Bob Dylan song? They've got God on their side because they represent one uh, group of the Islamic faith, and they anybody who doesn't see things the way they do is a just as much of an infidel as a Christian or a Jew, and the Quran says you should be able to take those people out or enslave them. So it is a challenge because we're not just talking society and modern government. We're talking uh, a religion that forms the basis for a lifestyle and controls their politics.
I don't think we'd be doing our guests a service here, not because we don't want to be the naval inquirer, so to speak. But there is one issue you and I talked about in the pre-show that I don't. I want to give us enough time to talk about because it's kind of a um, spoiler alert, not spoiler alert, but next week we're having Craig Whitlock on to not, to discuss our nat- unending crisis known as Fat Leonard. And along those same veins, I'm still trying to get my head around it. And again, all caveats apply about he hasn't been found guilty yet. However, the immediate past vice chief of naval operations was arrested last week for looks like just good old fashioned corruption and bribery which I don't think that the Chinese threw at us at the Shangri-La dialogue, probably because they have their own challenges they're working on. But as this story develops, it's what caught me. For those that don't know, you can find out online. Go look at what I don't know how many years he was on active duty. 35 years. A 35-year active duty retired four-star admiral makes in retirement pay. Evidently, that's not enough for some people. Uh, that while he was on active duty, he was already working his retirement gig, and the Department of Justice. Be interesting who was the whistleblower on it, but it's bad to see, but it's also good to see because that will have a lot of other people who might find themselves in similar situations looking at their post-retirement gig, who they're talking to and what they're taking while they're on active duty. It's going to be an educational thing to watch. You have more of a legal mind than I do. What kind of caught your attention on the announcements on that?
Well, that he got charged, and it is a bribery. I think one of the allegations is bribery. And as you say, we don't know. It is alleged, and he's been arrested, and that doesn't mean much more than that it's alleged and he's been arrested. But we've seen from Fat Leonard and before, we've seen a number of cases in which active duty people have sold secrets to the bad guys, done us major harm. I mean, and just recently a chief petty officer got 18 years for attempting to sell secrets to a foreign government. I mean, it is, I guess there's some amount of money that will corrupt some people, but it we these it is frightening to see, especially if you were around when some of the things happened back in the day when our technology and our crypto stuff was compromised. I mean, those were bad times.
Yeah, that was, and for a very long time after that, we still used a lot of the crypto equipment that the Russians had the design for, simply because we didn't have any replacements for it, and we just hoped that the new code of the day. But you look at back, what was it? The KY7 was one of them. Punch card technology is not that hard to crack once you have the design of the machine in place. If you're willing to replicate it, but it does it does serve as a good reminder that whether it's petty corruption, where people are taking stock options and $100,000 payments from civilian companies that they have a way of steering business to, or it's somebody selling stuff they squirrel out of the skiff uh, for money to buy vacations with or something, that uh, there's a reason why we do have some of our rather irritating regulations and security procedures. But at the end of the day, it's what's between somebody's ear that's going to determine whether for ideology, uh, sociopathy, or the desire to have more money is going to uh, lead somebody you work with to do something. And I think especially with the case that went to DOJ about the former vice CNO, and again, this will come out in court, I'm sure, is how they found out about it. But people, if you're suspicious that somebody around you is involved in something like that or might be a security risk, uh, there's a time and a place to look the other way. But at the end of the day, if you do look the other way or if you don't mention it to somebody, like we saw with Walker and that spy ring that you mentioned from a few decades ago, in case of war comes, that's going to cost lives and even could risk not just operations, but the course of an entire conflict. And especially when it comes to some of the penetrations the People's Republic of China have already made, both directly and indirectly, with our um, armed forces. And and it wasn't involving us, but it did involve some people I indirectly knew. In the Estonian military, there was a great article in the Atlantic out about how one of their artillery officers, basically was a victim of a honey trap.
Mm.
And that is one of the oldest plays in the book. And Fat Leonard, that was part of the equation too. Is
Yeah.
once you've done some things that wouldn't, like the aviators say, how would this read in a mishap report? How would this read on the cover of Navy Times? Once you do something like that doesn't read too well, people have a way to push you in a variety of directions. I think we still have pretty good training on it, but human beings are human beings, and these things will happen on a regular basis.
Yeah. All you can do is try and do the old days we had the personnel reliability program and stuff where you a lot of things that if you were living beyond your means and stuff, people would come and ask you questions. Uh, but here we go. We've finished our first hour on Riverside. I hope people have been listening and enjoying what I think is improved audio quality. I guess we'll find out when we get some feedback.
Yep, and it's been a great hour. And again, join us next week, everybody, where we will be talking to Mr. Whitlock about his book on Fat Leonard. It's the gift that keeps on giving. So until then, hope everybody has a great Navy Day. Cheers.
Molly wrote a neat reply to Irish patio, saying Mike Maloney wants to marry me, and so leave the Strand and Piccadilly, or you'll be to blame. For love has fairly drove me silly, hoping you're the same. It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Piccadilly, farewell, Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary.